Well, this is the bed chamber over the parlor area, and they call them chambers instead of bedrooms. And you kind of look around here and you see a trundle bed, which is where all the children slept, and they had a pull-out here, which is the trundle for the little children. And they would all hop into bed in the cold of the winter, or the heat of the summer actually. But when it was very cold, the mother would come up and take coals from the fire, or the fireplace over here, because every room had a fireplace to keep warm. Remember, there was no heat. And they would put the coals in here, and this is called a bed warmer. And she would come in and obviously lift up the cover and take the bed warmer and spread it around here and warm up the bed, because it was very cold up here. And she would get the bed all nice and warm with the heat from the coals, and then the children would hop in and keep warm. They would all huddle together, and then she would close the curtains on the bed so that it would be nice and toasty warm in here. And the fire would be put out at night. They never kept their fires going at night for safety reasons. So it would begin to get cold, and the curtains kept the heat in. She would probably do the same thing for the little ones, and of course the curtains at that time, we don't have the authentic ones right now, but they would probably have been much bigger, and the trundle would have been included in that curtain. Something that's a little unusual here is a table in the bed chamber. But with 9 children in the family, Sylvanus' father, Mr. Thayer, was often disturbed by the noise of the children. So he would have meetings up here in this bedroom, and he would have a guest sit at the table, and they would conduct a business meeting up here, and it was quiet, and it was done in quite a few of the homes when there was a large family. They would bring the dinner up and serve it. Right here is called a salt cellar, and salt was considered important. And if you were seated above the salt, that's where the most important person sat. And below the salt was the less important. So of course your guest would be above the salt, and that would be considered. You could always tell if there were several people at the table, if they were above the salt, then they were considered the most important person. It's kind of an interesting thing. Again, we have the 2-time forks, which was very common then. And downstairs, you probably didn't know, but children were often not allowed to sit at the table. They had to stand, or sometimes they would take their dinner and go over to the hearth and sit in front of the hearth. So the father always sat at the head of the table, and the mother was to his side. Sometimes the baby would sit at the table in a little high chair, but sometimes the children were not even allowed to eat at the table. So obviously up here, this would just be for adults and for visitors. And these are little tiny closets. There wasn't a lot of clothing in those days, so this is actually a fairly good sized closet for the rest of this house. But they had very few outfits, and they didn't need a lot of closet space. This is a small hearth, as you can see, but this would keep the room warm as long as it was going. So everybody had a fireplace. This house is called an A-frame, and there's a slanted salt box roof to it. And when this was added, which wasn't original to the house, it was added probably about 30 years after the house was built in 1640, they added this area, and the children were able to get a little children's room. And It's a little bit dark in there, but perhaps you can see that this is where the children would go to play. And it's filled with a lot of the little things the children would have, a little tiny bed and little potty chairs and little wagons and all kinds of little chairs for the children. So they really enjoyed that room. And over here, again, we have no lighting, so it's very dark, but this would be the back of the house. You can see up here where the salt box roof line is. And this back, I'm sure, was enjoyed by the children as well. These little tiny cubby holes. I would love this. And then this leads into the main bed chamber, which is where the parents slept. And again, there was no plumbing or electricity. So we have a washstand here that was used by the parents in the morning and at night. And this is where they would wash up. There would be water here in a jug probably. And they would do a little bit of waking up, cleaning here. And Mr. Thayer would use the shaver and shave. And that would be used every morning. And the water was very cold. And again, we have another fireplace in this house. And a few more closets. This was mostly used probably for books and for other little items. These little dishes are interesting. They're called tinker samples. And we just have them here because they were what a tinker, who was actually a salesman, would come to the house with all these little samples. He would come in a wagon probably once a month or so, and he would use these to show what was available to people. He didn't have to, they didn't take up a lot of room, and he could use them as samples if they wanted to order something or they were able to afford to buy it. These things were made in England, and he would put in orders if somebody wanted them. But these were small little things to show what was available. So we have them here just to show you. But again, these are very short, narrow closets. And another bed warmer here on the wall. And this chair is interesting. This chair, as you can see, was actually a straight chair. See these legs that go down like this? And then at some point in time, these runners were added, these rocker runners. And it was turned into a rocking chair. So again, a lot of times things were done out of necessity in those days, and different things were invented that they didn't plan on. This is an interesting thing, boys and girls. There were no clocks. So nails were put in at the point at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun line would hit the snail line, and they would know that it was 12 o'clock. And of course, anything before 12 or after 12, they would just have to judge. But this was called a timeline. And the way the sun came in, it would hit that. This was a cradle, a handmade cradle, and with 7 siblings, I'm sorry. There was probably always a little one in there at some point. This interesting thing is a bed shirt. And years ago, as I said, they didn't have too many outfits. So what they would do is, in the wintertime, they would just layer their clothing. And in the summertime, they would wear less. These were night shirts, and often they would take these shirts and they would wear them under their garments during the daytime. And at night, of course, they would take the garments off and just use the bed shirt, maybe if it was warm enough. There was also curtains on the sides of these beds so that parents as well could stay warm. And of course, we all know that they would use the bed warmer as well. There was a desk for Mr. Thayer or Mrs. Thayer to do their letter writing, and They wrote with quill pens, as Mrs. Nicosia explained to you downstairs, with the ink and the pen. And the chairs we have roped off, of course, now because we don't want anybody sitting on them. But that's what they actually used. One thing that's interesting too, boys and girls, is that this is a spice cabinet. And spices were imported and they were very expensive. So they would keep their spices up here in the bedroom. They didn't want people using them or anything to happen to them because they were expensive. And so they would bring them upstairs knowing that they would be safe. Kind of a strange thing for spices, but in those days they considered spices to be important.